Good evening, everybody. I'm Audrey Morris. I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland, a co-sponsor of this forum this evening. With Election Day looming, we're taking any and all opportunities to talk with voters about how much their voice matters and help people make sure that their voter registration is up to date and get them the information that they need to cast a vote. The League wants to make sure that you check your voter registration or that you register if you haven't registered yet. We have people outside that are conducting voter registration, so you can check your registration, you can register if you're not registered already, or you can request a vote by mail ballot also. And we have the vote by mail ballots. We have information about Vote 411 and the dates for voting, and we have bookmarks that are very handy because it has our Vote 411, which is our online voter's guide, which is really an amazing resource where you can just put in your address and get all the information that will be on your ballot. So with it, I'd like to thank you for coming, and Angela, I guess you're going to introduce Henry.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Angela Woodson. I'm the Political Action Chair for the Cleveland branch of the NAACP, and I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for this evening. Mr. Harry Boomer has over 30 years of broadcast news experience and is a 2007 Broadcasters Hall of Fame inductee. He has been an anchor, reporter, host, and executive producer with WOIO/WUAB television since 1990. Mr. Boomer has served as president of the Cleveland chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists and has been on the board of the Ohio Associated Press. Harry has called Greater Cleveland home since 1990 and is proud to live in the historical Huff neighborhood in Cleveland. Please welcome Harry Boomer.
Angela, thank you. Good evening, everyone. How are you? All right. There are a few of us here, but where two or three are gathered, everything is going to be just fine, right? We're going to do what we do, talk about what we need to talk about, and make some change and get people out to the polls. Again, I want to thank everybody for inviting me, the League of Women Voters, the Cleveland NAACP, the League of Women Voters, and of course, thanks for hosting us here at this wonderful center here in Cleveland Heights. I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a little bit. We'll get right into that, but we're going to try and make this, as we have tried in the past, to make this a nonpartisan discussion about voting and voting rights. And if you have a statement, we're going to ask on these little cards in a little while to write things down. And please, if you will, print them legibly so I can read them. And then we'll try to get your questions to the table and answer it as well. I would also ask that you do me the favor of taking this thing called the smartphone and turning it down or turning it off or on vibrate. This has the computing power enough to run the space station. It is called a smartphone, but it is not smart enough to not ring at an inopportune time. So if you would please take your time and turn down or off your smartphone. And also, let me just say in the offsetting here, starting out, that voting is such an important issue, something that we all have a responsibility to do as citizens of this great state and of this great nation. And it is important also to remember the history of what many have gone through for just the right to vote. Women were not allowed to vote initially in this country. African Americans were not allowed to vote. The struggle has been long and mighty and steadfast, and the right to vote is still under attack today. I say that because I want to vary from the program just a little bit and introduce somebody who I think is emblematic of why it's important, who has been a witness to history. And I want to just tell you tonight, we have in the audience someone who stood up for voting and voting rights when she was only 7 years old. Cassandra Tate, and will you please just stand for us? Cassandra Tate grew up in Selma, Alabama in In 1965, Voting Rights Act were still being suppressed despite the passage of the Civil Rights Act a year before. On March the 7th, 600 marchers were voting for the right. They were attacked by state troopers, that's in Alabama, and came to known as Bloody Sunday. On March 21st, the third attempt to cross the Pettus Bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Miss Tate was among the young children who waited at the end of the bridge as the civil rights activists started their march to the state capitol. And we all know what happened there and how difficult a time it was and a pivotal time it was in American history. And we thank you for being here. We thank you for standing up then, even as a child. We appreciate it. My father was a Baptist minister, and I won't go there very much, but say that I remember hearing in the church all of my life to teach your child in the way that he or she should go, and when they're older, they will not depart from it. We thank you very much for still being in the struggle, all right? And we often say that the children are our future, and I think we all believe that, but in order for that to happen, they must also be our now. We cannot not love them now through the things they're going through right now, so that they won't have to fight the battles that we are still fighting today, some 50 plus years after we thought everything was okay. With that in mind, let me go ahead and start with the rest of the program. And I'd like to have Angela Woodson, who just came up, to come back up and talk us to a little bit about the NAACP and what it is doing about the voting number. She was on a show that I do over at channels 19 and 43 called CW 43 Focus. And she said something to me then on that show that literally blew my mind. I won't steal her thunder, but I will ask her to talk about the numbers, Angela, that you talked about then. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the podium Ms. Angela Woodson.
Yeah, he put me on the spot. I kind of didn't come with all of my notes for that. But part of the NAACP Cleveland branch focus has been really improving on our civil rights here in the Cleveland area. We are a branch that is growing steadily, so if you're interested in joining, our membership team is back there, Donna, and Ms. Frances Blunt. But we are definitely fighting. If you remember when, with the Tamir Rice situation, our criminal justice committee worked very hard to expose that, to get Judge Adrian to even write a briefing about some of the police violence situation that was going on as far as racial profiling. All of that kind of falls on our lap, to even some of the discrimination that goes on within schools, which is unfortunate that we're in 2018 and these things still exist. So the things that we think that happened in the 50s and the 60s are reality today. And it's so much better when we all work together, as they did then, as we do need to now. But part of my hat within the NAACP with political action, I've been exposing numbers of voting. And I got concerned because when President Obama ran, we saw lines that were just unbelievable in this county. I don't remember as a kid seeing lines like that, and couldn't tell you when, at just polling locations, not just downtown at the Board of Elections. And then it seemed to be a drop-off, and it seemed to keep dropping off. So what we got to see was, in our county, we have like over 884,000 registered voters. And then you have what turned out, this past May is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the purge. Everybody I know is caught up in the purge, but I've kind of been caught up what is today, what's right now. And so with 884,000 registered voters, this past May, we were only able to get like 272,000 out. And we have 53 municipalities in this county. So I started saying, this is not just an African-American minority issue. This is really a diverse issue. Somehow we are disconnected and using that power we have that's absolutely free to vote. And so somehow, we need to leave today feeling motivated, regardless how big or large the room is. I always tell people, we have the power to go and leave this room and call 5 other people, and let them call 5 other people, because this election is crucial. Midterms are crucial, and it means a lot that people turn out and vote. And even though people say, oh, I don't like the candidates, guess what? There are issues on this ballot. There's an issue on this ballot that's going to change a lot of people's lives, and a lot of their fate is riding on this issue this November. And some people have school levies. Like I said, there's 53 municipalities. If you don't show up and vote, how do you expect schools to have the finances that they need? So I know sometimes we get stuck on the candidates, the partisan issues, but we have real everyday issues, legislative policy matters that come up on these ballots, and we can't afford to miss that. So just keep that in mind. 884,000 registered voters. How do we even come close to that number for this November?
Angela, thank you. I know it was an impromptu request to have you come up, but I thought it was important to put this in some perspective because we really cannot afford not to vote. I contend that the one person, one vote is the only time that we in America are equal. I can only cast one vote on Election Day. You can only cast one vote on Election Day. The Koch brothers can only cast one vote on Election Day, one each, by the way. All right? So it's just so important that we sear in our minds how important it is to get out and vote, to motivate not only ourselves, even if it's a rainy, cold, snowy, icy, inclement weather, a sunshiny day, that day will pass. But if you don't get up and vote what you don't vote on, and the person that gets into office, if they are voting against your best interests, that is going to have years of repercussions. So always please remember the responsibility, the obligation, the right that people fought and died for everybody to have the right to vote. So we're going to talk about why should I vote, what's at stake in the November elections. And to do that, we have some very esteemed guests, and I want to thank them for showing up this evening. There's so many other things that they could be doing, so many other places they could be. They could be at home watching PBS and watching the recounting of the hearing that went on in Washington today. But again, we're going to try and keep it bipartisan or nonpartisan. And let me introduce each of our guests. At my far left, you know him as Judge Michael Nelson. He was elected judge of the Cleveland Municipal Court in November of 2017. Michael, as I know him, graduated from Cleveland Glenville High School in 1967 and immediately applied for and was accepted at Central State University. Upon graduation from Central State in '72, Michael returned to Cleveland and joined the Cleveland Public Schools as a teacher. In 1986, Michael fulfilled a personal goal when he entered the Case Western Reserve University School of Law, from which he graduated in 1989. Michael's civic involvement was recognized by the Ohio governors George Voinovich and Bob Taft, who appointed him to successive terms at Central State University as a Board of Trustee, and the Cleveland mayors Michael White, Jane Campbell also appointed him to the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District and the Civil Service Commission of the City of Cleveland. Mike has served as a president of Central State University, the National Alumni Association. He's the founding president of 100 Black Men of Greater Cleveland, and he was the president of the Cleveland branch of the National Association of Colored People, the NAACP. Michael's honors include the Thurgood Marshall Fund Alumnus of the Year, the Central State University Alumnus of the Year, and induction to the Central State University Alumni Achievement Hall of Fame. He is the proud father of 4. He has 4 grandsons, 2 granddaughters, and a great-grandson. Will you please put your hands together for Judge Michael Nelson. Got to shuffle a couple of papers here. Sitting next to Judge Nelson is Camille Wimbish. She is director of the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition, a coalition of nonprofit voting advocate organizations. She received her JD from the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law and her bachelor's degree from Smith College. Will you please put your hands for Ms. Camille Wimbish. To my immediate left is Mike Brickner. He's currently the Ohio State Director of All Voting is Local, a group dedicated to ensuring the right and ability to vote at all levels. They help communities, and particularly communities of color, identify and remedy barriers to the ballot box. So please put your hands together for Mr. Brickner. And what I'm going to do is give each of them 3 to 5 minutes to sort of tell us a bit more about who they are and what they do and why they're here. And then we'll get you involved in just a little bit. But Mr. Brickner, since I called you last, I'm now going to call you first.
That's totally fine. I'm ready to go. I'm very excited to be here talking about these issues here tonight. As Mr. Boomer was saying, I'm with All Voting is Local. If you've not heard of our organization, that's okay, because we've only been around for like 2 months. So it is a new initiative that was spearheaded by the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. If you haven't heard of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, they're a DC-based civil rights and human rights organization. They've been around for decades. My favorite fun fact about them is that they actually helped to write the Voting Rights Act back in 1965. I'm trying to get that added on to my business card because I think that's very cool. And the All Voting is Local campaign is also supported by the ACLU National, the American Constitution Society, Campaign Legal Center, and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law. And part of why we are starting this new campaign, and we've focused on Ohio and 4 other states, is because we recognize that the right to vote is still in danger in this country, and that the places that we have typically placed our trust in expanding and defending the right to vote are failing us. We had the U.S. Supreme Court that has essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act a few years ago. We have the Supreme Court that just upheld voter purging here in Ohio and across the country. We have Congress, who has not passed any good laws on voting rights, much less much other good laws. We have a Department of Justice that has been antagonistic towards voting rights. And we also have a state house that has not advanced a whole lot of positive, proactive measures on voting rights. And so we really recognize that there was an opportunity here to begin to work locally, that every single day there are decisions that local election officials make, local government officials, and local civic groups that either help to enfranchise a person or may keep them away from the ballot box. And so some of the work that we're doing are things like going into the local jails here in Cuyahoga County, but also other places, and helping to facilitate voting in those jails. Helping to make sure that people who are coming out of jail and prison who do have the right to vote know that they have the right to vote, and if they need to re-register to vote, ensuring that they're going to re-register. Also helping to enfranchise people with disabilities, that people with disabilities face architectural barriers every day when they go to polling places that are not accessible to them, and they need to oftentimes then ask for accommodations. But they also face attitudinal barriers, that people with disabilities are still told or presumed by some people out there in the community that they don't have the right to vote. And in fact, they do. And so we are helping to empower and educate folks with disabilities so that they know what their rights are and that they're able to assert their rights and able to cast a ballot. But those are just some of the examples of things that we're doing on the local level. I would challenge us that there is a lot at stake on the ballot. And we absolutely should go vote this year, November 6th. But I think the title of this talk, Why Should I Vote? It's a good question. But it should also be, what else should I do besides just voting? That if we all just go and cast our ballots on November 6th, and however the election turns out, it turns out, we've only taken like the first step in terms of changing our government and making sure that the government is reflecting our wants and our needs. And that we also have to think about what are we going to do after the election? What steps am I going to take to make sure that my elected officials are representing my beliefs? And what am I going to do to make sure that they're held accountable so that they are actually doing what they were elected to do?
What we try and do is give you an opportunity to talk further about that as we get on into the evening. Thank you, Mr. Brickner. Camille Wimbish, if you will, please. And I'm starting the clock. I didn't do it before. Here we go.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. I know there's a number of places you could all be. My name's Camille Wimbish. I work with an organization called the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition, which is actually sort of a broad coalition of state, national, and local organizations that are working together to figure out ways to modernize our elections and to make it so that everyone is able to have access to the ballot and make sure that their ballots are actually secure. And so we have a number of community partners, such as All Voting is Local, the NAACP, the League of Women Voters of Ohio, and the various chapters all around the state. We work with student organizations, the Campus Vote Project. We work with good government organizations like Common Cause, environmental organizations. We work with other nonprofits all around the state who are looking to do civic engagement work, because we know that we can't do this alone. We have to work together. We have to pool our resources and pool our people and pool our messages so that we can get out into the community with trusted messengers, all encouraging people to be active and to get educated on what's at stake with the ballot. So this fall, we are focused on our election protection program. Election protection is a nonpartisan program. It's a national program with the 866-hour OUR vote hotline. And that's a number where people can call if they have questions at the polls, if they want to know what ID they need to bring, or if they have encountered problems at the polls. Maybe the lines are really long. Maybe the poll worker's telling them they're not on the rolls and they know that they're registered to vote. So we're here providing people on the ground and assistance. We also have lawyers who are there to intervene if there are problems at the polls. So if you guys are interested in learning more about it, come see me. We'd be happy to fold you into the program. We are also trying to really get people to pay attention to what's on the ballot when it comes to judges. We've got these judicial votes, actually judge for yourself cards that we are circulating to do a Fair Courts project, where we're just trying to make people aware that judges are so important. They impact so many areas of our lives, and yet oftentimes people skip voting for judges, or they simply go on whose yard sign looks the coolest. And we're really just trying to get the word out there that there's so much at stake, and we're trying to make sure everyone is educated. So thank you for doing your part and showing up today, and just ask you again to go out and tell those 5 people some of the things that you learned here so that we can spread the word.
Thank you, Ms. Wimbish. I appreciate it very much. We'll go next to Judge Michael Nelson. You heard his extensive resume. I sort of skipped over a lot of it, but if you could, sir, just sort of tell us who you are and where you're from and what it is you want us to know.
I'm actually sitting in for Tom Roberts, who's the state president of the Ohio branches of the NAACP, and Angie Woodson, who is our political action committee, asked me to come and stand in for him because he couldn't make it today. But you already heard why we should vote. And thanks to Harry, he ran through my bio. I'm going to switch up just a little bit in my 30 or 40 seconds. Our country is 242 years old. For the minorities in the office, in the meeting, that really takes on an additional significance because out of that 200, and women, it's important for what I'm saying is relevant to women as well. Out of that 242 years, African Americans have only been able to vote since 1965, which is about, what, 50, 60 something years? So this franchise is really a unique franchise, and women suffrage is also something that is short term. So out of the 240 years, the majority of people in this room have been able to vote for less than a third of the existence of this country. My grandmother was born in 1907. Her grandmother was born in 1869. So out of the two of them, their voting experience was extremely limited. And they were all in Florida and Tennessee and Georgia. So the franchise, trying to get people to understand the blood, sweat, and tears that really underscores this franchise is the Emancipation Proclamation was 1863, and we really couldn't play a role in the governance of the country, even though we were emancipated. So it was like we were emancipated to unemployment, disenfranchised. Our disenfranchisement lasted 102 years beyond our emancipation. So that sort of gives you just an idea of how important when people don't want you to participate in something, it must be for a reason. And the fight to keep blacks and women out of the franchise was such a significant fight, and it must have been for a reason. And we see the reasons now, because being allowed to vote turned the country around, and it made our democracy that much stronger. But we're about to lose our democracy for two reasons, I think. To be a truly democratic society, you have to have educated people with good judgment. And we've lost that. Most of our urban schools throughout the country, civics is no longer a science that is a subject that is taught. And so the importance of voting is lost on a lot of us. And then the rules that have made it so difficult for people to, by 2020, I don't know how any urbanite is going to be able to get any ID to allow them to vote. It's going to be so difficult. But then my final comment is that we look at voting as those who don't vote vis-a-vis those that do vote, when there's a third group that we have to go back and get, and that group is those who really don't give a hoot about voting. And they don't give a hoot about voting because they're uneducated. They conscientiously said, I am not voting. And the reasons are multitudinous. You know, it doesn't work for me. I just don't see the value in it. So we have to figure out a way to re-educate that significant group of people who said that, you know, voting, I don't feel like being bothered, not interested, don't talk to me about it. As well as those who, and those are people who conscientiously have withdrawn from the process. Sort of reminds me of how we look at unemployment. Those who are looking for jobs, those who recently lost, and those who we don't count because they've been unemployed so long that they're no longer considered a number. And that's what we have as a third group of voters. So I just want to put that out there as we begin our discussion about this, why it's so important to vote. And then I'm going to have a conversation about this. Judge for yourself. Now, this says no reflection on the people sitting next to me, but the African-American judges are about to go after this very hard. You may have read a couple of articles in the paper. Elizabeth Sullivan has just written one about the credibility of Judge for yourself. African-American preachers went right at it because African-Americans have been judged, evaluated, whether regardless of incumbency or experience, 2 number grades less than Caucasian candidates and judges, regardless of incumbency or experience. And in fact, we have a meeting coming up with Elizabeth Sullivan where, and it's not a sour grapes thing because everybody's gonna be meeting with Elizabeth 1. But we're having a serious discussion about this whole judge for yourself process. And if you read the last article by Elizabeth Sullivan, she questioned the credibility and the transparency of the process. There was a young man named Bart Hull or something who was given a 0. And we African Americans have been talking about this a long time, but because it was a young white man, they finally decided to say, maybe we better look at this. He was given a 0 ranking, even though he's been practicing attorney for years, by the bar associations. There's another instance where there was a straight conflict. Annette Butler, who was a federal prosecutor in the civil division and a law school professor, got a 0 recommendation for judge for yourself when she ran a couple of years ago, if you remember that. That's impossible. So we've started to say we got to look at this thing. So Harry, let me hand it back to you. That's we raised just a couple of issues for us to consider tonight.
All right, sir, thank you. You're only 25 seconds over. That's not bad.
All right.
Appreciate it.
That's my wife, Donna. Harry, she just sent me a text said, they ain't gonna never recognize the fact you're married. Donna, she sent me that text. That's Donna over there.
Donna Kelso Nelson right there at the NAACP table.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Ms.
Ms.
See,
Frances Blount.
yes, she got on my case for not saying hello earlier. Thank you. All right. Since we're recognizing people, let me take the privilege, the MC's privilege of recognizing a friend who's in-house here. This is Fred D'Ambrosi. He's my former boss at Channels 19 and 43. Came out to support a brother, thank you. His wife, Libba, thank you very much. And she is the one who brought Ms. Tate and her daughter here this evening, so thank all of you for being here to support this effort. Let me also remind you that I will pass out these cards, so if you have a question or comment, basically a question, Mike here has them right there, and he'll be able to pass them out. Please, if you could make it a question and not a statement, and please print so that it is legible, it would be greatly appreciated. Let me go back to the panel here and just ask, in terms of, again, in the spirit of being nonpartisan, as best we can, given the climate that we find ourselves in nationally and locally, what do you see as a remedy to some of the voting barriers that we have today? And talk just a little bit about that, because as Mike said, 1965 is not that long ago. Only 53 years ago. In my lifetime, I got the right to vote again, but I appreciate the fact that it is there. So some of the barriers you see and some of the solutions, I think we mostly know the barriers, but let's talk solutions now. And Mr. Brickner, I'll start with you.
Sure. And I think it's a great point that it's only been since 1965 with the Voting Rights Act that we've seen people of color in particular be fully enfranchised in this country. And it's also important to recognize that the 2016 presidential election was the first presidential election since 1965 that we did not have the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. And so when we talk about, there was, after the election, there was a lot of shaming and blaming of people saying, oh, well, we didn't have turnout from the African American community, and that's why Hillary Clinton didn't win. But look at what was going on in the country, that there were concerted efforts in many of the same places that the Voting Rights Act was intended to prevent bad actions, to prevent people of color from casting their ballots. I think we can look at even what's going on here in Ohio, where we have our voter purging system that has been affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court. And if you look at who is likely to be purged, there are several social science think tanks and reporters and journalists that have looked at this. They have found that you're more likely to be purged if you move frequently, if you're low income, and if you are in a neighborhood that is predominantly African American. So if you look at the city of Cincinnati, if you look at white suburbs, you only have about a 4% likelihood of being on the purge list. If you live in a black suburb, you have an 11% likelihood of being purged. And so, we see these types of efforts being put down, and maybe they're not directly a poll tax or a literacy test, but they have the same effect. But I'm very happy that there are solutions to this. I think that, number one, we as a public have to really believe that voting is a right. It's not just a privilege. It's something that we are entitled to and that we need to assert, and that it needs to be as free and fair and open and accessible as possible. Camille and I worked on this really great set of documents here. We have a one-pager and then a longer form document, but it sets out really a proactive vision for what we want to see out of Ohio's election system. So it has things like adopting automated voter registration. So this means when you go to a government office, not just the BMV, but other government office like Department of Job and Family Services, maybe your probation or your parole office, maybe your Department of Disabilities office, that if you interact with them, unless you opt out, your information will be sent to register you to vote. And so it makes sure that people are in the system. It makes it incredibly easy and convenient. And it also makes our system more accurate. That if you're taking data from a government database and putting it into the voter registration system, you're more likely to have data that's actually really good and that you can clean up and make sure that your database is correct and that our rolls are accurate and up to date. We also recommend increasing early voting opportunities. I think Angela had mentioned before about having long lines, and I think many of us remember that in the 2000 and 2004 elections. And Ohio did institute no-fault absentee voting, so we didn't have to have an excuse to vote by mail. And we brought about early in-person voting, and we had Golden Week where you could register and vote at the same time. There were some pushes against that, and we saw where there was legislation passed, where there had to be litigation over it. We've now had early in-person voting and vote by mail for a while, but we can actually make them better. One thing that many people don't know is that the settlement agreement that established early in-person voting hours expires as soon as John Husted is no longer Secretary of State. So the next Secretary of State is going to decide, are we going to have evening and weekend early voting hours? And think about what communities rely on those evening and weekend hours and need them in order to cast an early ballot. So that's an incredibly important thing on the ballot this year. In addition, though, we should also have more opportunities to vote early. That some people like to vote by mail every single election, that maybe that's just what's convenient for them. So other states have implemented things like allowing someone to be on a permanent absentee vote list so that you get an absentee ballot each election unless you tell them you don't want it that election. And so it comes to you and you don't have to submit applications every single election. Additionally, we have prohibitions against multiple early voting centers in a county. Here in Cuyahoga, we have 1.25 million people, and we have one early voting site. That makes no sense, and it leads to long lines at the early voting centers. We should rescind that prohibition and allow people to use early voting and have multiple locations across our counties.
Thank you, Mr. Brickner.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, let's go to Ms. Wimbish and talk to you about, you mentioned something earlier about folks being able to vote who have been incarcerated and their rights to vote, and just getting them up to speed as to their eligibility, because oftentimes people believe incorrectly, I think, that because they have served their time, paid their debt to society, that they are no longer eligible. Under what conditions are people eligible to vote when it comes to having been incarcerated? And even if they're in jail or haven't been convicted, they can still vote depending upon the circumstance. Explain that to us a bit more.
Yeah, so under Ohio law, basically, and if you are currently in prison for a felony conviction, you may not vote. So that means you are sitting in prison with a felony. Now, if you have a misdemeanor, or if you're in jail waiting for a trial, or you are on probation or parole, you can still vote. And a lot of people don't know that, or they've been told maybe by someone in the jail system that they're not able to vote. Or back in 2012, maybe you guys remember there were these terrible billboards that said voter fraud is a crime, and it sort of insinuated that if you have some sort of criminal background, that this is going to be held against you. So this is a myth. This is misinformation, and unfortunately, it holds people back from voting, and that's exactly what some of the powers that be want to do. They're trying to make sure that people who have less power, who are underprivileged, can't stand up and take that power away from them. So that's certainly something we have to fix.
What's the pushback on that then for this election?
The pushback on prison.
Get the word out. How is that?
Well, so, we are, there's like the ACLU has a toolkit, an organizer's toolkit that explains how community organizations can work with officials in the jails to do the jail voting. There are a number of organizations like the Northeast Ohio Voter Advocates, that is in particular who's been involved in doing that program, that I'm certain would be happy to welcome volunteers. And then of course there's these voter education forums where we're relying on citizens to come to learn and to spread the word.
Thank you very much. Judge Nelson, your thoughts on, and you mentioned this too, about people not thinking that it's important to vote, and for those who will sit back and say, well, this is a midterm, it really doesn't matter. Talk to us about why it does matter and efforts that you're aware of that get people to understand that every vote counts in every election.
Well, I know, local efforts, including the ones you're hearing about tonight, but you have the Souls to the Polls efforts in churches that needs to be expanded, and it needs to be started earlier so we don't wait until a particular day to do it, but that we start promoting that as an event, as a community event with all kind of incentives. I remember during the last election, on the election day, leading up to election day, they had major activities down by the Board of Elections where people were actually, of course it rained like cats and dogs, but up until the time it rained, you had a lot of activity around the Board of Elections, picnics, music, parties, all kind of things. So you have to go back and sort of look at what kind of efforts were used when people who were really being disenfranchised in the South, where you brought large groups of people into communities, and that was the activity. That was the activity. We have a number of street corners in our community where people gather, and we look at them and drive quickly past them. I'm thinking of 131st and Harvard, where there's a big group of people there. We could just send people there and just say, look, not only get them registered, but then go back to take them to the polls. You pray for good weather so that those people who are gathering go to places where people are. We also need to try to push Ohio into become one of those automatic registration states. Where I don't know how many there are now, but where instead of you are registered unless you decide you don't want to be registered, as opposed to you having to go get registered and getting purged. You need to push the state. We also need to go to our Board of Elections. The issue that was just talked about with these signs that were before, we have to go to our Board of Elections and challenge people who put those signs up at the Board of Elections, and make sure while we're at the Board of Elections we get convince those boards of elections to put out clear and convincing evidence about who has the right to vote. So the questions about felons being, because we get this all the time about felons not being allowed to vote, and we have to correct that all the time. So we go to our Board of Elections and say, look, we want you to make a statement that and start the discussion at the Board of Elections about who has the right to vote. So they come out, and then you can go out with your press conferences, get on your radio stations. You use Sam Silk, use all those radio stations that have your TV station to push public service announcements, and integrate it right into the, if you have to spend a few dollars, integrate it right into the buy time on these stations to actually push voting rights and education, and let felons know that you have a right to vote. And just push it out there as part of our normal course of conversation.
All right. Thank you, sir.
There's
Appreciate
a hand
it.
back there.
Okay, what we're going to do, if you have a question, write it down. I have several here. That's the process we're going to use. If you have a question, write it down, and we'll go from there. This is a good place for us to then start implementing that, getting the voices from the audience, and we appreciate the fact. Whoever will take this, and this is the very first question we've had, what can we do to improve the power of the cities in the state legislature? I don't know who wants to tackle that one. If nobody, we'll move on, but if you have something, and if you could...
Tax on home rule, and somehow we have to convince our legislatures, and I don't know when the last time the legislature serving this community had a town hall meeting. They may have had one recently. In fact, I believe, Angie, they did have a town hall meeting. About 12 people came to the town hall meeting. We have to, look at this room. We're talking about one of the most crucial rights you have, and it's going to be put in place in a very, very short time. But we have the complacency and apathy. We have to attack that. But one of the things that really hurts cities is the attack on home rule. And if we could somehow get a reasonable legislature to to go and start arguing for home rule in certain aspects, more home rule in certain aspects, that may help.
All right, thank you. Anybody else want to respond to that? If not, we'll move on to another question.
I would just add that I think the other thing that hurts the power of cities is our gerrymandered system. That when you have districts that are gerrymandered that favor more suburban, rural districts, and you put all of the urban communities together into like one or just a couple districts, then you are going to have lopsided representation at the state house and in Congress. And so I think that that is also a major component of what is on the ballot this year too, in that the folks that we will be electing into executive offices this year will have a hand in drawing the districts in 2020 and 2021. And so, it's important for us to be engaged with that and to make sure that those are done in a fair way.
All right, thank you very much. I'll move on to another question, and this one is, what is being done to engage basically the youth are our future, voters to participate in the voting process? As I mentioned earlier, we often say that the children are our future, but what are we doing to make sure they're engaged in learning and participating now?
So I can take part of that. So one thing people may be unaware of is that students can actually, 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds can actually be poll workers. And Mike's got these great little poll worker recruitment little flyers here. They can be poll workers and get school credit for doing that. And they're really helpful for a lot of the older poll workers who aren't as comfortable with the voting machines. They learn about the process, and then they get sort of ingrained in the importance of voting. And they say that once young people start voting, they develop a culture of continuing to vote. So that's really important. We talked about, possibly trying to advocate for, the pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds so that when they show up at the BMV to get their driver's license, they're already in the pipeline to be able to register when they turn 18. We've got a number of organizations that are working on college campuses to make sure students in college campuses are aware of how they can easily vote from their campus address. And so we've got to just work together and think about how we can reach students, because they are a huge swath of the population, and they're engaged. They're certainly an important voting bloc that we need to make sure that they're getting the information, because they're inexperienced and they don't exactly know how these voting rules work. And so that's why we have to give them the voter tools to, what ID you need to bring, where do you go vote, that kind of thing.
Right. There's an old process that happens almost annually. Take your child to work day. Why don't we take our children to the polls when we go vote? It's a learned process, and when they see you do it, they tend to follow suit. They do as we do, not always as we say. Any parent knows that. Let me ask, there is another question from the floor, and it says, please clarify, are actual absentee ballots sent to every registered voter, or are absentee ballots request forms sent to every voter, or must each voter take the initiative to get an absentee ballot?
So yeah, I can handle that. So number one, no, absentee ballot request forms are not sent to every registered voter. If you are a voter who has missed a federal election, and this goes back to the voter purging, you are purged from the voter registration list after 6 years or missing 3 federal elections. So if you didn't vote in 2012, 2014, and 2016, you might be purged after this election in 2018, because we didn't do any purging the year before. But what happens is, so if you missed 2016, you may have been placed on what's known as confirmation status, which means that you missed an election and they don't consider you an active voter anymore. And so when the Secretary of State then sends out the mailing of all the absentee ballot applications that we all hopefully got if we're registered voters about a week or two ago, those individuals do not receive that absentee ballot application, which I think is a horrible thing that Secretary of State does currently. Because if we're talking about people that are infrequent voters that need to vote to not be purged, we want to provide them with all the opportunities that any other voter would get, and that there's all sorts of reasons why somebody might miss an election. Maybe they were ill, they had a family emergency, who knows? But no, they don't. Not everyone gets an absentee ballot application. With the pre-registration or with the list for absentee ballots, the permanent list, that would, in those states, those individuals are placed on a list where they don't then have to send in a absentee ballot request form, but the Board of Elections or the Secretary of State in those states knows to automatically send them that ballot each and every election unless they say, no, actually, I want to go in on election day, or I'm not going to vote on this election.
Anybody else want to address that?
One of the things that I think Angie talks about all the time is the percentage of actual registered voters that participate. Because it's not only just the percentage of the community but eligible, it's actually the percentage of those who are registered who just opt out. Now, I was reading Denver, Colorado, which had a tremendous turnout, over 70% of the residents of Denver. I don't know if Denver, if it's the county or if it's just the city, but over 70% of the people in Denver voted. And in Denver, everybody that's registered gets a ballot mailed to them. So, you know, that's what I'm saying. We have to go to our Board of Election and make them more customer friendly, I guess is a good word for it. They send out, you know, everybody gets a ballot. And then you can choose whether you want to send it back in or not. And you can vote by mail or home, or however you want to do that. But, you know, that's the other issue, making sure that those who are responsible even though we always talk about personal responsibility, I mean, we do pay taxes, and you know, we can ask our institutions to be much more proactive in making sure that that their primary duty, which is promoting voting, that they actually promote voting. So that's another thought that we can do in order to increase the percentage. And you talked about young people. It's a very interesting thing here. Every school, every fall, has a what contest? Homecoming, king, and queen. And it's usually a voting contest. So our young people, I guess, I don't know, how can we make the connection between that and the larger civic responsibility? Because they vote every year, at least every fall, on the homecoming, king, and queen. So how can we transition that enthusiasm to voting in elections outside of school?
What's interesting about that is in California, in Orange County, they actually have the boards of election go into all of the high schools, and they do, they bring in the equipment, they show how it works, and then they actually run their homecoming elections and allow the students to have fellowships with the boards of elections, all of that kind of stuff. So if you look at Orange County, it's something like half of all of their poll workers are actually high school students. So it's been incredibly effective to get young people really engaged with the system and to see how voting works on a really basic, on-the-ground level.
All right. Thank you. Speaking of that, what are your rights if you think you are unfairly denied a ballot at your polling place, and are poll workers well trained here in the state of Ohio?
So everyone has a right to a provisional ballot. You should never walk away from a polling place feeling like I wasn't allowed to vote. That's why we have the 866-OUR vote hotline for people to call who have questions about their experiences at the polls so they can get help. So the deal is a provisional ballot. Some people may be confused about what exactly a provisional ballot is or why I was asked to vote one. It's just basically a backup paper ballot that if the poll worker has a question about your eligibility, so maybe they don't see you in the poll book, or maybe the poll book says you requested an absentee ballot and here you are at the polls. Maybe you didn't bring the right type of ID, you didn't bring a driver's license, you didn't have a utility bill. So they'd have you fill out a provisional ballot. The most important thing to do well, right now, here, what is today? September 27th. The most important thing for everyone to do today is to check the registration status to make sure it's up to date. If it's up to date and the Board of Elections has that information, you will get a regular ballot. For folks who do not check their registration after October 10th, and if they've moved, they may have to vote provisionally. But that's okay. That just means they'll just sort of sort out the paperwork after the election. But everyone should feel that they have the right to vote a provisional ballot no matter what. Oh yes, you can check it. You can check your registration online. You can go to myohiovote.com to check your registration. And then for the poll worker training, poll workers are expected to be on the job from 6 in the morning to 8 o'clock, maybe 8:30, maybe 9 o'clock at night. A lot of them are, older. They're sitting in uncomfortable chairs. Maybe they got a 30-minute break. And they're getting training maybe once a year if they are coming, regularly. Maybe it's every 4 years. And it's a huge poll worker manual. So we're expecting a lot out of people. But that's not to say that our elections aren't important and they shouldn't get it right. So it's kind of a two-way street that we are hoping that we get out the word so everyone understands their rights as voters, but that if poll workers do something, if they make a mistake, that we can call them on their mistakes and get it fixed with the Board of Elections.
Hey, let me ask you a question. Let me ask a question. Do we have any registration packets here tonight? We do? Okay. One of the things I think that is a real challenge, and I think we can do this if each one of the people here I think the National NAACP has this 5, get 5, or something like that. Is that what it's called, Angie or Kayla? And that means each one of us take 5 registration packages and register or confirm that our neighbors, people around us, at least 5 of them are either registered, have the proper change of addresses. So at the end of the day, if each one of you would just take 5 and commit to get 5 between now and what's the early registration date? October 10th. Register them and then take them down there and have them vote. But at least register them and get the stuff turned in. And that increases our numbers. This small group can really increase the number of people that Okay. Well, get what you can get, and then you can get them. You can get them downtown, so you can become a deputy. Yeah. And you can become a deputy registrar now. You want me to explain that process real quick about how if that's even required now?
You don't have to do that. Anyone can help someone fill out a voter registration form.
Good.
Yeah, I was about to ask if that was a requirement, that you had to have special training or some kind of certification. Okay, thank you. Another question from the floor, and thank you for these questions. How is social media being used to encourage people to vote, and what websites can voters view to research issues and candidates?
Well, so one of the best resources, I think, for issues and candidates is the League of Women Voters Guide, that they are strictly nonpartisan and give you just the facts. So if you need to look at up information, there's going to be one constitutional amendment on our ballots. There may be some local races that the local chapters outline and also have information about candidates. I think also checking your local newspaper, Cleveland.com oftentimes posts not just the actual endorsements, but they've been posting also just the endorsement interviews. So you can watch firsthand what the different candidates say in response to different questions. And then I think also hooking up with the League of Women Voters and going to forums, they're doing candidate nights so that you can go there directly and hear from the candidates and actually ask the questions that you want to ask. You know, sometimes I listen to one of those endorsement interviews, or I see a commercial from a particular candidate, and I'm like, they're not talking about anything that I actually care about. And I want to know about X, Y, and Z. No better way to find out the answer to those questions than to go to your local forum and actually ask the question.
Another way you can do it is call the candidate. Call the candidate. For example, with the judicial races, you want to know what the candidate's position is on bail bond reform. You want to know what their background is on the issues that are important to you, whether it's civil rights, police brutality, whatever the issue is, women's rights, the women's right that you ask them. Call them and ask. And when you call them and ask them, they will give you answers that they won't give in a form because they are totally caught off guard when you call them and ask them. If you call a candidate and say, look, Candidate Nelson, I saw you running, and what's your position on bail bond reform? And see what they can't give you, because they're not ready for that. And you probably would get a much cleaner, more honest answer, or you get a lot of stuttering, one or the other. So, yeah.
Well, the only thing I'd add to that is the benefit of asking them in a forum is that 100 other people hear their answer, right? And so then they're on the record with what they think about bail bond reform or whatever else, too.
Do both things. Do it all. Do it all.
All of the above.
All right.
Or you can call to the, usually there's a number on the candidate's literature. You know, there's a number on the candidate's literature, and you let them know that you represent whichever street you live on. I represent Belvoir Boulevard. And, you know, they don't know whether you represent Belvoir Boulevard or not. But, you know, I represent Belvoir Boulevard. And this is the question I have for you. And I want your candidate to call me and tell me that, tell me the answer to that question. So.
All right, thank you. Here is another question, and I don't know, let me just ask it. It's what can be done to reduce the influence of money in politics? I guess given Citizens United, not a whole lot, but anybody want to address that?
So my organization is working with the Fair Courts Working Group to look at how we can do just that. And one of the proposals we're trying to talk, we've done a lot of community forums, and one of the issues is, you know, people don't even understand that judges can hear the cases of their contributors, and they're not required to disqualify themselves for that. And, you know, the judicial canons say judges should avoid even the appearance of impropriety. So, you know, it doesn't make people feel good when they think, oh, well, the person that I'm going up against at court, maybe they gave a really big check to that judge, and I didn't. And that makes people think, oh, I'm not going to get my fair day at court, right? That's what everyone has grown up hearing, like you get your day in court. So we're looking at the ideas of lifting up what we call recusal, just making judges disqualify themselves if they do have a conflict of interest. And then the disclosure is important too, because we need to know, you know, who is actually giving to these candidates. There is Citizens United, but Ohio law says, they just haven't updated our laws. They could, if we wanted to, require special interest groups to disclose who is giving to those groups. And that would help us to at least have an idea of who, when you see ads on TV saying, you know, Judge Judy lets rapists and murderers go free, paid for by Citizens for the Children. I don't know who these people are. I don't know who's influencing. I don't know if it's Russia. I don't know if it's people in, you know, California who's giving to this candidate who's trying to get this judge not to run. So, you know, these issues of, you know, transparency and is really important to our democracy. So I'm hoping that we can make some strides in that.
All right, thank you very much. Another couple of questions here, and this one, they apologize for the long question, but what words of encouragement do you have for young people who are looking at the issues, voting based on what they think is best in a nonpartisan way, but are being bullied or demeaned, told their votes don't matter, or things went wrong because they didn't vote with a specific party? This can be extremely discouraging coming from family. So I don't understand. Anybody want to address that?
That sounds like a tough situation. I mean, first of all, whether or not you vote is a public record, but who you vote for is private. So that's your choice for who you vote for. I would say, you know, absolutely, it's important that you vote your conscience, to do your work, to look up the candidates that support your views and your values, and vote for them. But you got to stick to your guns.
Yeah, and I think too, you know, I, of course, working for an organization that works to expand the franchise and get as many people to be able to vote, who are eligible to vote, who want to vote. You know, I would love everybody in the United States to vote every single election. I also know that our system is not always built for that. In fact, there are multiple obstacles that keep people from sometimes casting their ballot. But that also when we talk about like people not feeling engaged, or like the people in Washington, D.C. or Columbus aren't hearing them, that's also based off of the structure of the system. That in Ohio and in many other states, we have a gerrymandered system that doesn't represent what the actual individuals in the states and in the communities actually believe and want to achieve from their legislators. And so it's very easy for a young person, or frankly any person, to become very jaded and disillusioned with the government. But if anything, you know, the victory from the folks with issue 1 in May shows that the people can take back the power, and that we have an opportunity now with this election and the elections coming forward to put people in positions who will draw fair and competitive maps, and to set down the framework to better engage people for a long period of time. And we're all part of that, whether you're young, old, or rural or urban or anywhere else in the state of Ohio. It's important to show up.
All right, thank you. I have the last 2 questions that I want to talk about, a couple of issues. You mentioned issue 1. I want to get to what that is. But I'm going to combine these 2 because they're very similar. How can we get candidates to the forums, and how do we introduce candidates to people who don't usually vote in the midterms? How do we make them relatable and get them out to talk to the people, or the people to talk to them?
You know, candidates show up where there's a history that the people that host the forum are voters. If you go to Ward 1 in Cleveland, high voter turnout, people go to Ward 1. So and that's where they place their emphasis. And it's also the emphasis how they spend their money. So they spend their money where pockets of people are likely to vote. Cleveland Heights, high voter turnout, people turn out for Cleveland Heights forums. And that is also how services are delivered. If your community has a high voter turnout record, then services, city services and other services come to your community. But we have to make sure that we connect people with let them know that the political game will go on whether they play it or not. You know, the game doesn't stop because you don't play. This one, and if you don't play, then people will make decisions for you. And we have to make sure people are connected and understand that your failure to protect your own franchise gives that power to somebody else who may not like you. So somehow we have to make that, you know, use our marketing people. If we can get people to buy cigarettes with the thing on it, this will kill you, we ought to be able to market voting in the same way so that people would take advantage of something that's going to benefit them.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. I want to go back and touch on something that Mike talked about, and that was issue 1. And explain what issue 1 is. As my understanding, it is to reduce or eliminate nonviolent sentencing when it comes to drug laws or drug offenses. Explain what issue 1 is and what we can do. And also I want to talk briefly, if I can get you to address these issues briefly, each of them, the gubernatorial candidates that are running, and those that are running for Senate, the Ohio Attorney General, and the Secretary of State. These are all important offices that are up on November 6th. So let's talk first about issue 1, what that is and why it is important that we get engaged.
Mike, you can go ahead and I'll support that. The other 2 here I have to withdraw from. I'll go sit out there in the audience because I can't express a partisan opinion about the candidates. Okay. That's a violation of the canons. And Angie's always afraid that I'm always on the edge of the canons when it comes to politics. So I will
Well, we know you're a passionate brother, Mike.
Yeah,
but go
and
ahead.
I think all of us working for nonpartisan organizations aren't going to be endorsing any
Yes,
candidates
yeah,
up here.
yeah,
First thing I wanted to say too was in relation to having the candidates relate to like the people, and this relates to what I said earlier about people not feeling engaged with their elected officials. So I'd also say to people who feel like they aren't able to engage with their elected official is maybe you should become an elected official, right? That maybe it shouldn't just be the same old people with the same old last names running for every single seat in Cuyahoga County, right?
Can I segue?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Let me say this very quickly, because see that NAACP table over there? We have an election coming up. And what he just said is so important. Our NAACP has been run by people that are 90 years old, and we have some young people. Stand up back there, folks. Stand up there, all the people back here. Stand up, Kayla and Angie, Charlotte, and Angie. Stand up a minute. Angie, stand up a minute. They are all under 70. Now, I'm not saying that all the 70-year-olds are bad, but we're trying to encourage. So the membership for NAACP, Frances is our membership person. She is working so hard to get young people involved. It's only we're not an elitist organization. It costs $30 to join. And it's not all black people, if you know the history of the NAACP. So at the end of this meeting, I want you to go over there, give her $30, get your membership, because we have an election coming up, and it's important that we keep this momentum so that events like this and the other events we've been doing, because that was not historically, the recent history of the NAACP is that's not been going on, and we've been able to revitalize that. So we want to keep that going. Now let me get back to you.
But so important, right, to take action yourself. And if you don't see yourself represented, then maybe you should be a candidate. On issue one, so issue one on the ballot this November does, as Harry said, tackle our criminal justice system and specifically drug laws. What it would do is it would reclassify most low-level felony offenses. So these are typically called F4 or F5 felonies, having to do with drug possession. And it would reclassify them to misdemeanors. If you look at our state prison system, we have nearly 50,000 people in state prison right now. We spend over $1 billion in our state budget on just our correction system alone. So we spend a lot of money. We lock up a lot of people. Many of those people are low-level, nonviolent drug offenders. And it's not really working in our state. We're spending an awful lot of money on our prisons that we could be putting into our schools, into our roads, into our healthcare. And if you look at the human cost, where people have criminal convictions and they follow them for the rest of their lives, where they're unable to get housing or a job or education, and so they end up back in that cycle of incarceration. And we look at what's going on in our communities with overdoses right now, where we just saw the numbers from last year. We had over 4,000 people in the state of Ohio who overdosed. We are the Montgomery County and Dayton. That's the overdose capital of the country right now here in Ohio.
Died?
Overdose and died. Fatal overdoses.
It's just not overdosing, overdose deaths.
And yes, thank you. So over 4,000 overdose deaths in the state of Ohio. And so, what we are doing now, this war on drugs, it's been instead a war on certain communities, and it has relied on enforcement-heavy policing, and it has decimated a lot of our communities. And so issue one would change the felony classification to a misdemeanor. It would also take cost savings that is achieved from that, because people would not be in state prison any longer. It would take that and reinvest it back into the communities so that they could have more drug rehabilitation, mental health care, and other services that would hopefully help to prevent a lot of the drug issues and other criminal issues in our communities. So that's essentially what issue one would do.
Now, the thing about issue one, the municipal judges, the prosecutors, the Criminal Defense Association, every organization associated with law enforcement is against issue 1. Now, that's the organizations. There are specific municipal judges who sort of see how this thing has really worked who are for issue 1. I happen to be one of them. It's aimed, and they're giving you these scare tactics. We're gonna have drug traffickers. It's aimed at users. It's drug possession, not traffickers, possession. And they talk about the number of doses of fentanyl that would still be classified as a misdemeanor. It is users, not traffickers. And we've combined the two so long that we sort of lose sight of that. The other thing that they say, well, there'll be no enforcement policy. Well, if a person violates 3 times, then they can be held, okay? Because it moves from misdemeanor to felony. So all these look behind the language so you can ferret through the scare tactics. The other is they'll tell you that some outsiders did it. Well, the outsiders did it because our legislature, with their lack of vision, refused to do anything about this matter. So now they've gotten religion now, and they're saying, well, it was us, some outsiders are coming here and forcing this on us. Well, that's because they failed to do anything for decades. For decades. So our prison system has exploded, families have been separated, lives have been destroyed because people were getting incarcerated. They lost all their benefits, job opportunities, and everything else because they were incarcerated for possession cases. So, sometimes it's good to give a judge discretion, but oftentimes the 4s would be incarcerated. Then they violate their probation because they relapse. Well, they were addicted. That's what addicted people do. They relapse. You try to get them some help, but they would jail them as opposed to treat them. So issue 1 is very important for us turning this state around. And don't be, look behind the scare tactics.
Well, thank you very much on that. Just in regards to the opioid problem, in 2017, there were 31,000 deaths in America due to the opioid epidemic, 31,000. In 2017, there were 36,000 people who died from flu in America, the flu. But we don't see the hysteria. I see a couple of posters telling me not I'm 65 to get a double dose of the flu vaccine, but 36,000. In 2017, 480,000 people died because of smoking and smoking-related illnesses. 480,000 in 1 year in America, all right? Over 680,000 die from heart disease every year in America. Folks, there's a lot of things that we have to hold our politicians and people responsible for, but we have to also be responsible ourselves to make sure that they do what we want them to do and not what they're being paid to do by the various interest groups around the country. Those folks who spend the big bucks, who are now unable to spend unlimited amounts of money because of Citizens United. Thank you very much. I want to give each of our panelists, and want to thank them, an opportunity to make a closing comment, maybe a minute, maybe 2, and then we'll wrap up. But thank you very much. So, Mr. Brickner, we'll start with you.
Sure. Absolutely. I feel like everybody in this room probably is registered to vote and is planning to go vote. So again, I would challenge you, think about what else are you going to do beyond just voting. So register to be a poll worker. We have these cards over here. If you can't be a poll worker, take some. They're over there. You can get my business card. I'll send some to you. I've got plenty of them. Encourage other people to be a poll worker. And also take this literature about what we can do to make our voting system better. And then take it to your next forum for your candidates. Ask your legislators, ask your city council members, ask your Secretary of State candidates, what are you doing to make voting easier in our state? Because we can do it, and this is the path to do it.
All right, Ms. Wimbish.
So obviously, you guys all care about voting. That's why you're all here. But your charge is to go talk to your neighbor and your friends and your kids about what's important to them. If they say they don't want to vote, ask them why. Ask them what's important to them. Try to dig deeper. Because I imagine that after 2 or 3 questions, you're going to get to an issue that they care about, and you'll be able to point to someone who's running for an office that would actually have influence over that issue. Again, if we really need help with monitoring the polling locations this year, so if you are interested in being a poll monitor, you could just be 2 or 3 hours. We get you trained, and you would be able to help voters who may have questions, who may get turned around, or may get bad information from a poll worker. Make sure that they're actually able to cast their ballot, because that's the key here, is making sure that everyone who actually turned out is able to get their voice heard at the ballot box. So thank you.
I'm going to encourage you in my 1 minute to come to the NAACP meeting, which is going to be held on next Tuesday, October 2nd, where issue 1 will be one of the major topics. I think there'll be people from both sides of the issue. And it's at University Circle, United Methodist Church. It's protected parking at the University Circle United Methodist Church, 7 o'clock on Tuesday, and there'll be a significant discussion. I think Shakira Diaz, who's pro issue 1. Right. So you want to hear a spirited debate, come to that meeting on the, and there'll be some other things that will be going on, and you can actually get involved in your Cleveland NAACP, which includes Cleveland Heights and everywhere around here. Okay? That's at 7 o'clock at University Circle United Methodist Church. The date is Tuesday, October the 2nd. Okay? All right, bring your friends, and there's no cost to get into it. We hope we might hold you hostage till you get a membership before you get out, but anyway.
Judge, thank you very much.
Pardon me? University Circle United Methodist Church, that big church with the blue roof down right in the circle. Pardon me? Yeah, the oil can.
Exactly. We all know that one, right?
The oil can.
Well, thank you very much. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. And we thank each of you for your questions and for your being here this evening. I'd like to thank the folks from the Northeast Ohio Voter Advocates, NOVA, as well as the folks who helped put all this together, the Alpha Omega Foundation, the NAACP Cleveland Chapter, CWRU Lifelong Learning, the League of Women Voters, the Greater Cleveland Chapter, and of course our host, the Heights Public Libraries. We thank you very much. Don't forget that it is important that you not only come here tonight, but after you leave here tonight, what are you going to do then? When you wake up tomorrow morning and you see something on TV or hear something on radio or read something in the newspaper or online that you disagree with, what are you going to do then? Are you going to say, well, I went to that meeting last night, and is that going to be all you're going to do? Or are you going to step up and get involved in a greater way? No matter what your politics, it is important that you understand the importance of your vote. If your vote did not matter, folks would not be trying to take it away from you, because people don't want anything that is of no value. If they try and take it from you, no matter who that is, and throughout history there have been Democrats and Republicans who have done voter suppression, poll taxes, and literacy tests and things like that. It was George Wallace back in the 60s. It was a Democrat, and now it may be Republicans. It wanes, it goes here and there, it varies. So just keep in mind there's always a fight that we have to keep on fighting. Too many have died, too many have bled, and too many have stood in the breach for us to sit back and not get involved. So I thank you very much for having me. Mike, thank you very much for having me. The League of Women Voters, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to be a part of this. Go tonight and be well, drive safely, and vote November 6th. Thank you.